I'm a freelance photographer, nothing too fancy, and my name isn't really known, but I quite enjoy it. My work usually takes me to various locations, capturing shots of specific spots or areas. This particular incident occurred during an assignment in Bristol. Just to give you some context, I'm based in central London, and this trip was meant to be a quick run to Bristol and back. I made my way down to Paddington Station, as one typically does, and hopped on the train service. The journey to Bristol took almost 2 hours, which was perfect for a little nap, though I didn't indulge in sightseeing that day. Upon arrival at Bristol Temple Meads, I got set up for my job. Now, this gig should have raised some red flags from the start. I was simply tasked with taking as many photographs of the historic city as possible. Normally, I'd receive more specific instructions, but when I asked for details, the client insisted that I use my own judgment to capture the best photos. They opted for one of my priciest packages, so off I went, hitting the streets of Bristol. Honestly, it turned out to be one of the most enjoyable assignments I'd ever undertaken. I was thrilled with every moment of it, even managing to snap a few shots of a brutalist gem near Bristol that was an unexpected delight. As I roamed the streets, I debated whether to stick to the typical photogenic spots. However, I decided to venture into the lesser-known corners and alleys, not fearing getting lost. I captured the old, the new, and the rough edges of the city, returning to the station hours later, eager to start the editing process. But here's where things took a strange turn. Someone I had noticed during the day in Bristol had photobombed several of my shots. It wasn't immediately obvious since I had moved around so much, but it became apparent that this person was following me. It was frustrating because those photos were some of the best I had taken that day. Other people appeared in the shots, just going about their day, but this person seemed to stare straight into the camera, and for some reason, I couldn't recall seeing them in person, as if they existed only through my lens. It was baffling. Regardless, I set those photos aside and focused on editing the others, sending them over to the client. However, several days passed without hearing anything from them. Then, out of the blue, the client reached out again, requesting more shots from different angles and specific places in the city. I quoted a higher price this time, considering the additional expenses involved, and to my surprise, they agreed and paid promptly. I worked on editing the new batch of photos, but something didn't feel right. It was the first time I had done something like this, and while the money was good, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing some boundaries as a professional. Nevertheless, I delivered the photos and hoped to put the whole bizarre experience behind me. However, things took a darker turn when I started receiving emails from the same person, now clearly identified as my stalker. They seemed obsessed with being in my photos and claimed our thing was just beginning. Despite blocking them, they found ways to reach out from different accounts, leaving me feeling increasingly uneasy. I decided to confront them, suggesting a meeting at Paddington Station. The response was enthusiastic, but I knew I had to be cautious. I arrived early, keeping an eye out for any sign of them. Eventually, I spotted them in one of my selfies, but they seemed to disappear into the crowd. It was unnerving, but I resolved to capture evidence of their presence. When I felt their presence behind me, I acted on instinct, snapping photos as they tried to flee. It was a tense moment, but I managed to capture clear images of their face. I reported the incident to the police, though I knew there wasn't much they could do. In the end, I resumed my work, taking precautions to protect myself. While the experience was unsettling, it taught me to be more vigilant and set boundaries as a professional photographer. And as for the identity of my stalker, it remains a mystery to this day. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel to stay tuned. When I was 14 years old, I didn't have a computer at home, so having internet access was out of the question. Instead, everyone I knew frequented cyber cafes, where you paid by the hour to use their PCs. Some of these places even had computers set up outside to attract more customers due to limited space indoors. Despite the crowded conditions, I enjoyed playing Counter-Strike with the boys. Being the only girl, I naturally attracted attention, especially as I got better at the game. One day, a guy started showing interest in me. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but his persistence became unsettling. He waited for me outside the cyber cafe and eventually even followed me after I left. His advances were unwelcome, but I didn't want to cause a scene, so I tried to politely fend him off. However, his presence only grew, making me increasingly uncomfortable. My sister, Fiorella, noticed my distress and encouraged me to speak up and seek help. She shared a cautionary tale about grooming, emphasizing the importance of standing up to predators. With her support, I began confiding in trusted adults and friends about the situation. Despite my efforts to avoid him, the stalker's persistence increased and he began appearing near my school. This time, I couldn't escape, but thankfully my volleyball teammates came to my rescue, and our coach intervened, driving away the stalker. With the support of my family, friends, and community, I confronted the stalker and ensured my safety. The experience taught me the importance of speaking up and seeking help when faced with harassment or danger. It also showed me the power of community and solidarity in overcoming adversity. I never would have imagined any of this to be possible, but I stumbled upon something intriguing through a photo on a random post from an account I don't even follow. In the background, two people have me questioning everything about what happened almost a decade ago, but I can't delve into that without going back to a time when I thought everything was perfect in my life. Let's start by using some fake names to protect anonymity. I'll refer to my family as the Smiths, and my husband as Michael, and my daughter as Emily. You can call me Sarah. After years of living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, we finally bought a cozy little house just 15 minutes outside the city. Despite the daily commute, it felt like a dream come true. We were the quintessential American family, complete with a yard where Emily could finally have the big dog she had always wanted. The transition wasn't seamless, but the first night in our new home, the silence was blissful, interrupted only by the occasional hoot of an owl. Our neighbors welcomed us warmly, bringing over pies and extending invitations to neighborhood gatherings. While their gestures were kind, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Call it paranoia from too many horror movies or true crime documentaries, but the perfection of it all felt suspicious. Determined to embrace our new life, I decided it was time to fulfill Emily's dream of having a big dog. We adopted a rescue named Max, who quickly became an integral part of our family. His calm demeanor reassured me that everything was fine. Despite my initial reservations, we settled into our new routine. I made friends with some of the other parents in the neighborhood, and Emily became involved in various school activities. Everything seemed idyllic, until one day, during a visit from my mother-in-law, she made a comment that set off alarm bells. While we were having lunch, she pointed out our neighbor David and remarked that he seemed to be watching our house a little too closely. I brushed off her concerns, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. Her unease only grew when she noticed David following us during a neighborhood walk. I tried to reassure her that it was just a coincidence, but she remained convinced that he was up to something. As weeks passed, Sheila's suspicions seemed to intensify. She claimed that David had been lurking around our property and even tried to peer through our windows. Despite my skepticism, her fears started to rub off on me. I confronted David about Sheila's accusations, but he denied any wrongdoing. The situation escalated when Sheila accused him in front of our neighbors, causing a scene that left me feeling embarrassed and conflicted. The tension continued to mount until one day, I returned home to find our house ransacked and both Michael and Sheila missing. Panic set in as I realized something was terribly wrong. The police launched an investigation, but there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade, and I struggled to cope with the uncertainty. Months passed without any leads, and life returned to a semblance of normalcy, albeit with a lingering sense of unease. Then, out of the blue, a photo surfaced on social media that turned our world upside down. In the background of the photo, I saw Michael and Sheila, alive and well in a foreign country. The revelation left me stunned and confused. How could they be alive after all this time? And why had they disappeared without a trace? The answers remain elusive, but one thing is certain: our lives will never be the same again. There's this guy in high school named Clyde, and pretty much everyone kept their distance from him, except for his two equally gross friends. In my junior year, I had the misfortune of being assigned to a seat right next to him in one of my classes. I immediately planned to ask the teacher to move my seat at the end of the class period on the first day. But before I could even get a chance, Clyde was already starting to annoy me. He kept asking all these questions about where I got my bag, my shoes, my top, and even questioned whether my hair color was natural or dyed. And all this was coming from a person whose aroma I could detect from 3 feet away. I made it through the first class period and stayed after to talk to the teacher, but she totally stonewalled me. She was one of those teachers who never really set expectations for anyone or anything. I had been warned about her by some seniors before. I thought she would let it slide instead of making me sit next to the followerless creep in the school for the whole year, but no. It only took a couple of days for Clyde to develop a crush on me. To make matters worse, I still walked to and from school, and Clyde found out about this. He took the opportunity to follow me home one day, or as he put it, escort me home to make sure I was safe, as if I hadn't been able to take care of myself for the last 2 years. My house was a 15-minute walk from the school, usually a perfect amount of time and a chance to relax between responsibilities. But with Clyde, it felt like eternal hell. We were out in the open, so everybody in the school could see us. Most people knew what was going on, but some actually thought I wanted to hang out with him. When I knew I had to sit next to him permanently, I tried to be as nice as I could, which wasn't very nice, but even that had been too much. It was too late to be mean because I tried that too and it didn't work. He found a way to gush about everything I said and did, arguing that we were very similar somehow. He was obsessed with the idea that we could get together and be like Bonnie and Clyde, but my name isn't even close to Bonnie. The worst part of him walking with me was the fact that he knew where I lived. It's no surprise that he tried to invite himself in, but I drew a hard line there and almost spat in his face. The only reason I didn't is because he probably would have really enjoyed that. I tried talking to my counselor about this to see if I could change classes, but he was also unhelpful. He would say things like, "Clyde hasn't done anything wrong," which was pretty much useless for me. At the beginning of September, we had a 3-day weekend for Labor Day. I reveled in having an extra day away from Clyde, but I was fully aware that he was responsible for the fact that I hadn't been able to reconnect with any of my friends from school, who made no plans for the weekend. I was so depressed that all I wanted to do was lay in bed anyway. I only had one thing going on, which was a baby shower on Saturday for a relative I barely knew. The night before, I had terrible sleep, getting rushes of anxiety for seemingly no reason, and every time I started to fall asleep, I fell straight into a nightmare about Clyde. At one point, I woke up and even thought I saw his face in the window. I had a mini heart attack, but when I blinked, he was gone. Just to be sure, I got up and looked outside, but there was no sign of him in the backyard. I closed my blinds and even put down the blackout curtains I never use. I couldn't sleep at all after that. I really couldn't decide if what I saw was real or just a visual disturbance. Sometimes when I'm just waking up, I see a crystal clear vision of a giant spider descending toward me on a thread. But when I blink, it goes away before my body even wakes up enough to move. In the morning, I asked my parents to make extra sure that we locked up the house before we left for the baby shower. I told them about the situation with Clyde and how he had been following me around. Thankfully, at least they had a concern for me. My dad assured me that he would lock the house, and my mother went the extra mile of reminding me she was a good shot with a taser. Then she gave me the little bottle of pepper spray from her keychain. It made me feel a little better, but I was still out of it the whole day. We didn't get home until about 8 o'clock that night. I had a snack in the kitchen, and while I was there, I made sure that the back door was still locked. Afterward, I went straight to my room and watched YouTube videos on my laptop until I passed out. Sometime later, I woke up, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe either. I was gripped with sleep paralysis. The closest thing I've had to a sleep paralysis demon is the dangling spider I mentioned earlier. But there was no sign of a spider. I kept trying to force myself to take a breath, but it was like I had forgotten how to do it. I tried to relax instead and looked around my room, but I got creeped out because it was darker than usual due to the curtains. Of course, I could clearly see Clyde's face peeking over the edge of my bed. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest.